I use the term Frankenstein monster for a reason. I'm not talking about horror movies. I'm talking about a creature created for some purpose who is able to turn against its creator, its master. And I propose and theorize that the outfit that elected Obama is a collective Frankenstein monster created by the Soviet KGB, who found themselves in position, trained, expert, very proficient at what they do, but without a master. And they are ideologically communists. So what do they do now? Now that the Kremlin is no longer financing them and calling the shots. They find their own funding, which they're prepared to do, trained to do. They get hold of money from the Ford Foundation, from the Annenberg Foundation, from various federal giveaway programs. They know how to solicit so-called campaign funds. They know how to manipulate the stock market and funnel millions and millions of dollars into their cause, just as the original founders of this group used to rob banks, literally rob banks to finance their communist revolution. These Frankenstein monsters, who are now left on their own with only one trade, they only know how to do one thing, and that is overthrow governments, is the only thing they know how to do. They don't know how to run governments. They only know how to overthrow governments. So they are analogous to the Frankenstein monster. Now they're on their own. Putin and his colleagues who were formerly in the KGB don't quite have control of these people. And by the way, the radical Islamists, the Islam terrorists, were funded and coached by Moscow as well. So here are these two Frankenstein monsters, two collective Frankenstein monsters, who joined forces, and they even called themselves the Red-Black Coalition. Red meaning communist, black meaning militant Muslim. And they conspired together to use their skills, which are basically propaganda, disinformation, media control, to put their puppet in office. So I begin by explaining the concept of front group. Anybody who knows what I know would be suspicious of the Black Panther Party. Anybody who knows what I know would be suspicious of the account from Ferguson, Missouri, of an out-of-control cop shooting in cold blood an innocent black boy, Michael Brown, and then have the whole scene explode into demonstrations and riots. Anybody who knows what I know, based on research into communist activities dating back to the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, would be suspicious of the whole situation. And here's an example of what is known about communist fronts, citing again the book by M. Stanton Evans entitled Blacklisted by History. This is what we know generally about fronts back in the 1940s. It mentions Munzenberg, Willy Munzenberg, a German communist that was an expert at propaganda and creating front groups. He was German, he wasn't Russian. A German communist working for Moscow. propagating Moscow's agenda here in the United States. Munzenberg. The point of this activity, as explained by Munzenberg himself, was to promote the Soviet interest through a host of propaganda outlets. How can we promote the interest of the Soviet Union? We must penetrate every conceivable milieu, get hold of artists and professors, make use of cinemas and theaters, and spread abroad the doctrine that Russia is prepared to sacrifice everything for peace. Or as his communist colleague Otto Kusanen expressed it, we must create a solar system, a whole solar system of organizations and smaller committees around the Communist Party. Smaller organizations working actually under the influence of our party. In simplest terms, a front was a Trojan horse, a metaphor often heard in the rhetorical battles of the time. The idea was to have a group that was under the discipline of the Communist Party, but that to the casual observer seemed something different. In most cases, the front was created ab initio, though in others, a formerly non-communist group might be captured and exploited. Two essential aspects of a front were that while it enlisted as many non-communists as it could, the control positions were always in reliably communist hands, and somewhat easier to spot, the group would invariably parrot and support the propaganda of the Soviet Union. The proliferation of such groups meshed with other communist blending tactics of the age, communist blending tactics. As progressive ideas abounded, utopian schemes were preached on street corners, and notions of collectivist planning espoused by many. The comrades seldom had much trouble merging their modified program with the general background noise of the decade. Judged by many public statements, it was hard sometimes to tell who was who. Accordingly, this was the golden era of the fronts, which functioned in virtually every sector of public life, from arts and letters to youth concerns to foreign issues of interest to Moscow, such as the Spanish Civil War and the Japanese attack on China. These were matters of some importance, as they help explain why so many people in the 1930s were drawn to the red orbit, and why a fair number of these would be induced to stay there. In the addled conditions of the time, such notable non-communist figures as Eleanor Roosevelt and FDR's Interior Secretary Harold Ickes could be persuaded to lend their names to pro-red ventures if these had a plausible cover, since the big-hearted joiners didn't bother to look beyond this. Likewise, less famous people, influenced by such examples, could be brought into the fold and often stick around to be converted. It was precisely in this manner Elizabeth Bentley would testify that she was recruited into the Communist Party and thence into the demimonde of Soviet plotting. For purposes of our survey, the most significant thing about the fronts was their linkage to the communist and government issue. In the 1930s, there was a fair amount of overlap between comrades on the federal payroll and the outside activities of the fronts. This wasn't good tradecraft, was indeed the reverse, especially for CP members in government called on by Chambers and later by Bentley to perform secret chores for Moscow. However, in this freewheeling era when nobody was paying much attention to such matters, the comrades often moved back and forth between their day jobs in the federal offices and night work or weekend projects, cooperating with the agitprop of the fronts.